Hey guys, what's going on? Paul here. Welcome back to another Cardano video. And again, we're going to get into some more of the technical side today, looking at more scaling options for Cardano in around layer twos. We'll touch on maybe sidechains, but I will reference back to the call we had a few days ago with Phil and George, going, I would say, fairly deep into sidechains, layer twos, the pros, the
Sorry, state
cons of
channels.
each. State channels, yeah. A lot. We covered a lot of stuff in that call, and definitely, if you want a foundation in it, a high-level foundation, I'd say check that out. But guys, you're welcome back, and thanks for taking the time again.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting you, Paul. Yeah, hi, my name is George. I've been a Plutus developer and dApp application or dApp protocol designer since the early days of the Plutus Pioneer program, first cohort, May 2021. Phil and I have been working together since June 2022. Yeah, we're excited to present this new proposal to you called Hydrozoa. So, whereas last time we talked about Midgard, which is an optimistic rollup based L2 protocol, today we're talking about Hydrozoa, which is a state channel based L2. Hydrozoa builds on Hydra and really tries to make it even more lightweight and flexible, so that you can more easily and with less steps open up a Hydra head, close it if needed, and bring funds in and out, as well as change the membership of the head without having to close the head itself. We feel that this flexibility will make it more feasible for dApps to start integrating this state channel based L2 technology into their stack. And so we'll have a variety of different apps emerge that can benefit from this kind of L2 scaling as a result.
And even more feasible to later in the future have networks of Hydra heads that
Yeah, yeah,
communicate.
that's a big goal. We're not actually so in the proposal or the project that we scoped out in our proposal currently, we're focusing on the core technology of how do we create these state channels, which are lightweight. But the very logical next step after that is let's network these things together and create a network of these state channels, similar to the way that we have the Bitcoin Lightning network.
Right. And the reason for this is it's sort of a prerequisite to the network, right? In that you need opening, if you want to have a network of Hydra deployments of state channels, then you need opening and closing these to be lightweight, right? Because the heavier it is, the less feasible that becomes.
Yeah.
So, just before we go any deeper into that, to pull it back up a level for people who mightn't heard of state channels before, or even Hydra, or what's the high level of a state channel? Is it a layer two or side, like we covered layer two, sidechain, stuff like that before? Where does state channels fit in? I know people familiar with the Lightning Network over on Bitcoin will have heard
Yeah.
references to this, or if you're around
Lightning
Cardano for a
Network is a
while.
perfect starting place here, actually. Um, so, Bitcoin Lightning, I think, was the first L2 ever to be proposed on any blockchain. And the idea there was very simple. So a state channel, or really it was like a payment channel back then, I think it was called, is two people, Phil and George. We want to interact with each other very frequently, back and forth, send money to each other without having to pay fees for every little interaction. So what we do is we lock our funds under a smart contract, and this smart contract is like they're just going to stay there for a while until we decide to come back and release them back on L1, right? And then having done that, now Phil and I, we can just communicate to each other. Okay, Phil wants to send me some money, or I want to send him some money, and we're just going to reallocate these funds that we've locked into the smart contract between each other, right? So if he put in 100 and I put 100, I send him 50. Now he has 150, I have 50, and we just shift this back and forth, right? And we can do this very rapidly because it's essentially a glorified Discord thread or something where we just send each other messages of like, okay, I'm sending you 50, you're sending me 50, and we just sign off on each. We both sign off on each one, and that's what makes it kind of authorized, right? So a transaction in this kind of in this communication thread between us becomes official, so to speak, as soon as both I and he sign off on it to agree, right? And so the trick becomes every time we do that, we want to make sure that we include everything that we've agreed to up until now, right? So every message we're posting is a new reallocation of the funding, right? So let's say the first one was, okay, now Phil has 150 and I have 50 ADA, right? And then the next one, if Phil wants to send me something back, right, we'll do another reallocation. Now Phil has 120 and I have 80. We want to make sure that when we're done doing this rapid fire messaging between us, we only want to bring the very latest balances back to L1 and release them to me and Phil, right? We want to make sure that the previous ones kind of get invalidated as soon as a more recent allocation is available. And so that's what the L1 smart contract is in charge of. It makes sure that when the participants are ready to close it down, like the state channel down, then one of the participants will show what he believes to be the latest allocation, and the other participant has a chance to show an even more recent one if it exists to release the funds according to the very latest one, hopefully, right? That's all it is. That's how it all started, right? That was a state channel in Bitcoin Lightning. Now in Bitcoin Lightning, because Bitcoin smart contracts had somewhat limited expressivity, they weren't really able to do it in the way that I just described, where I come in, I show it, and then there's just a chance for Phil to come in, kind of in a guaranteed way to, he has a guaranteed opportunity according to the smart contract logic to show his version of events as well, and then we pick the latest one. In Bitcoin, they had to do it with a penalty-based system, where if I'm the one closing the channel and I do the payout, my payout is placed on hold for a little period of time, and Phil has a chance to come in and show basically a fraud proof in some sense, showing that actually no, there was a more recent allocation, and so I lied when I brought this like stale allocation in, and because I did that, my payout goes entirely to Phil, right? So that disincentivizes me from posting a stale allocation, because if I do, Phil will just slash me completely, right? That's how it worked on Bitcoin Lightning. With Cardano, if we implement the exact same thing, the exact same kind of payment channel, with our smart contracts, we don't have to resort to these penalties. We can just have a smart contract that says, okay, no, we're just going to wait for Phil to come back and, within a period of 3 days, 5 days or something, if there's a dispute or something, right? And show his more recent thing, and then we'll do the reallocation in that way. But I'm still going to receive my money, even though I posted a stale one. Okay, no biggie. Phil came in with the real one, and then we'll just do it according to that.
Right. From a high level, what's happening is you're basically creating a mini off-chain ledger between the participants. So me and George lock our stuff up. We say, okay, well, we're going to transact with each other on our own ledger that me and George share. And then, this whole fan out is related to the case where, say, me and George, every time we're doing stuff periodically, we're multi-signing what we're doing. Right, so I send George some money, he sends me money, and we do thousands of transactions, and we're signing periodically. And then imagine a scenario where I go offline, right? My computer crashes, whatever happens, I get DDoSed. Then George wants to close the Hydra head. He wants to get his money back on the layer 1 because he's no longer transacting.
Yeah, I don't want to be stuck just because Phil is offline, right? I want to be able to use my money.
Right. But say the last thing that happened was George sent me 100,000 ADA and we multi-signed it, right? So George sent me 100,000 ADA, we multi-signed that, but I went offline, right? George now could, instead of submitting the last thing that happened, right, on the layer 1 and say, okay, this is what we're going to fan out, he could go to the one right before that, right, before he sent me 100,000 ADA, right? And that means, so this is basically explaining why we need this, right? Because that means, assuming, right, I stay offline forever, what would happen is the payout would not include that, right? So then George would get his money, right, including the 100,000 he sent me, right? Because the L1 doesn't know about that transaction. So this is why we sort of have this waiting period where I can come in come back online, right, and post, hey, you forgot about this 100,000 that you sent me, right, to make sure that all these participants are safe from these types of DDoS attacks, etc.
Yeah, but one thing to keep in mind though is that it doesn't have to be. We don't have to go through this dispute resolution process, right, when we're closing ahead. If we both unanimously agree that, okay, this is going to be the last snapshot, right, we're not going to do anything else in here, then we can just multi-sign that and declare it to be the last one. And then there's no need to do any sort of dispute resolution. Either one of us can post that one, and that's enough to say, okay, this was definitely the last one, because when it was signed, both people agree that there would be no more, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah, this is for when someone goes offline or when people have a disagreement.
Yeah, so the dispute resolution is intended for if someone unexpectedly goes offline or stops responding for whatever reason, right? Then the other people are not stuck. They have a way to release their funds within a particular period of time, right?
just on that, then you said about, so I want to go back to on the Bitcoin network in a minute, but just on that, the dispute process. So someone goes offline and you said you can still get your funds, but if they come back with a dispute, say 24 hours later, how can the funds be redistributed if there
No, they
is?
won't be. That's why there's the waiting period. So that person, right? If the dispute period is let's say 3 days, right? That person has 3 days to get back online and post what they believe to be the most recent one. And if it is more recent, then that's what we'll go with. But if they don't make it back in, then that's
right. So in the case where there's no dispute that George pointed out earlier, where we both sign and agree this is the final state, then that settlement is immediate, right? We both would get the funds released on the layer one. But in the case where someone goes offline, then there's waiting. There's this dispute period.
Okay, that's what I was
and George would not get his funds yet.
Yeah,
right?
I was starting to worry there was always a waiting period, but you can actually sign a transaction to say you all agree to close it then. And
even if we kick off the dispute period, if everybody comes in and says, yep, that's the most recent one, then we don't need to wait any longer, right?
Right. So say I go offline, George starts the dispute period, but I come back online, right? So say the dispute period is 3 days, but I come back online after 10 minutes, right? Then I can sign with George and say we're done, and we can still, we don't have to wait those 3 days.
Okay. I just want to go back to the Bitcoin Lightning one that you gave as an example when you said about, so you have the penalty system. What's to stop you having other bad actors or other accounts in that you pay out? You said this is the final one. I'm going to pay out to all these people, but you would forfeit your own payout.
Bitcoin doesn't. I don't think Bitcoin script is capable of handling this sort of this is the final payment state type of thing, right? As I said, the Bitcoin scripts are less expressive than Cardano scripts, right? So you're limited in what kind of logic you can encode. So I think with Bitcoin, it kind of has to be according to that penalty-based thing.
Right. It's all or nothing. If someone can show that they have a more recent multi-signature, right? So for Cardano, if someone shows they have a more recent multi-signature, then that becomes the state, right? So if I go offline, I come back online, I put that, that's what the closeout payout is going to be on the layer one, right? But on Bitcoin, if I go offline, I come back online, I show that. That's not the new closeout. What happens is George gets penalized for putting up the old one, and I get everything, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Or just in that example, I was thinking if George had other actors in the head as well, and you said, oh, they were all due whatever, 100, 200, and then yours wasn't enough to cover what was paid out to the bad actors. I presume there's ways.
No, you could never have a situation where people owe each other more than there are funds within the state channel. It's always just moving chairs around, right? Like it's always just moving money around between the participants that they had already brought in, right? So you could never have a situation where George promised to pay Paul and Phil within the state channel more than George actually brought in, right? That's impossible, right?
Right, Paul.
That's
I'm not sure what happens if,
right? Because that limits how much I can pay you guys, right? Based on how much I brought into the head.
Yeah, if there's like 5 people, right, and then they submit a fraudulent state, and then someone shows a newer one, I'm not sure like how the exact punishment system goes.
Well, no, Bitcoin just doesn't have multiple parties within the same state channel. They just have two.
Right.
And
Two.
so it's always
Right.
between, okay, there's
Okay.
two people and you're just moving things around between these two people, right? Per state channel. And so that's why in Bitcoin Lightning, right away, they went to the networking aspect,
Network. Yeah.
right? So now you have state channels, pairwise state channels between two people, right? And if the same person is both in this state channel and that state channel, then you can sort of have, if George and Phil are in the first state channel and Paul and George are in the second state channel, right? Then I can be an intermediary for Paul to send money to Phil, right? And this is where, we lost Phil, but anyway,
I'm sure I'll come back.
assume Phil is still here and Paul wants to send Phil some money, right, over these state channels. So what you're going to do is use something
This is a good example of where he's gone offline and now we can try and steal his money.
Fair enough. Yeah. But anyway, so what you would use is something called a hash time lock contract. And it's a very simple contract. All it is you can send money on the L2. You can lock it into a smart contract that says if Phil authorizes the spending of this UTXO and he provides some sort of secret that corresponds to this hash, then he's allowed to spend it, right? So unlike a normal, unlike the typical pub key address where all you need is just a signature from this pub key, we have an additional condition where you need a signature from this pub key, but public key, and you also need the secret that corresponds to this hash, right? So in order for Paul to pay Phil through George, what you're going to do, Paul, is you're going to send George money and lock it into this hash time locked contract where I can spend that money if I sign and I provide the secret. But you don't give me the secret. You wait, right? And then I will send money to Phil, right, in the other state channel, similarly locking it into the hash time lock contract, right, where if Phil signs and he provides the secret that corresponds to the hash that I locked it under, then he's able to spend it. And then so as soon as this chain has been completed and it's reached Phil, who has the secret, will then use the secret to spend the money. But as soon as he uses it, he's just revealed the secret to me. So I can take that secret and I can go to the money that you've locked for me, Paul, and I can unlock it for myself. And so now you kind of created this chain of these things that will conditionally happen if the secret is revealed. And then as soon as it reached the end, at the end, the secret is revealed, and then we kind of go back and release all these funds to the intended recipients, right?
Okay, interesting. So pulling it back to Cardano, we've heard over the years or people ask me, why haven't we got 1 million TPS per node? And these are different things that are said about Hydra. And I think what Hydra is capable has been blown out of proportion. But another one I seen was the head and how many participants, because the more participants, obviously, the more people have to sign different transactions. And how does this work at scale?
Yeah, perfect. Well, let's introduce Hydra. This is a perfect segue. So what does Hydra do that Bitcoin Lightning doesn't? So first of all, Hydra has multiple parties, not just two per channel, but multiple parties. And this is useful because one of the challenges with Bitcoin Lightning's network is that you need to do a lot of hops to reach someone, because every hop only gets you through one intermediary, and not all the intermediaries are interconnected with each other, right? And so it's kind of challenging to get to the other person. The other thing is it's hard to do atomic exchanges. So for example, if you, Paul, want to pay both me and Phil at the same time in the same transaction, or else do nothing, right? You can't really do that with these hops across, two-person channels or whatever. You kind of have to, it's harder to do. It's much more complicated to do that routing, right? Whereas if you have multiple parties within the same state channel, between themselves, they don't need to do any hops at all. they just send each other money, they reallocate the funds, it's all good, right? But if they do need to do hops, they'll need less hops, right? Because there's a higher likelihood that other state channels will contain those same parties, and kind of each Hydra head acts almost like a hub of like bilateral state channels, right? And it's sort of optimized to send money between those participants. So that's one advantage that Hydra brings to the table. The other one is the isomorphic ledger. So that means that it's not just about moving funds back and forth, right? It's a full-fledged ledger that these guys are keeping track of. So not only are they keeping track of the funds being sent to them, but they have full-fledged UTXOs, and those UTXOs can be locked into smart contracts, the same kind of smart contracts as we use on Cardano layer 1, right? And they can have state, right? So for example, dApps use state all over the place, right? If you look at a DEX, the state of the DEX is the amount of reserves, some price, maybe there's some Oracle brought in. If you have an auction, the state of the auction is what's the current highest bid, right, placed by someone. If you have a collateralized debt position type of like lending protocol or something, right, there's state in there as well. We are able to bring all of that to the L2 ledger, right? So that gives us way more possibilities in terms of the types of applications that we can build using these state channels. Whereas with Bitcoin Lightning, running dApps via Lightning it's challenging. Really, Lightning is mostly only capable of just sending payments back and forth, right?
Okay. And in terms of scaling it out, then, are there limitations on how many can be involved in Hydra?
Yeah.
You have to open and close heads, or for new participants, or what?
Yeah. So with Hydra, as it currently stands, right, ignoring any like future roadmap things for now, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you open a head, before you open the head, you have to set who the participants are, and you're not allowed to change that after the head is open. If you want to change the group of participants, you have to close the head and start a new head with a new group of participants, right? Second of all, you have to bring all the funds in advance as well before you open the head. You have to collect all of this from them. And so that can be challenging. And also, nothing can come out of the head. No funds can come out of the head until it is closed, right? So that can be challenging because, people can't plan in advance what they'll need to have inside of the head, right? And just because someone forgot to bring something doesn't mean that we have to like turn this whole ship around, go back and like, send a new one out, right? And so that's one of the things that Hydrozoa seeks to address. We want to be able to have like flexible groups that you can change. Like if the current group all agrees, then we can add people or we can remove people to the group without having to close the head and start everything all over again. And second, we want to be able to bring funds in and take them out quickly and efficiently without having to close the head, right? And thirdly, we want to make the process of opening and closing a head also more efficient. So opening a head should be a single step process, right? Because Hydra, for various reasons, the way that they initially designed and implemented it is it's like a complicated handshake protocol to open a head. So the way it kind of works is first we declare the intention to open a head, right? And we give each one of the participants that we've fixed, for the head, we give them each a participation token. And then each person has to come back with the participation token and lock some UTXOs to be picked up when the head is opened. And once all of them have done that, there's a collect commits transaction, which collects all the participation tokens and all of the corresponding UTXOs, smooshes them together into one UTXO that holds all the funds for the head, and then the head can be considered open. It also burns the participation tokens or locks them. I think it burns them. So it's this whole ceremony, right? To open a head, and it's a multi-step thing where like distribute the participation tokens. Each person does their commitment, and then you take them all in, and only then is the head considered open. And there's some things that can go wrong there, because if one of the participants doesn't commit their funds, right, then you can't open the head until they do. If they decide to abort, then what the other participants just did is all, is all wasted. So there's various things that can, like, it's a lot of machinery. In Hydrozoa, we got rid of all that. If you want to open a head, you just open a head with some group of people, and then you figure it out afterwards in terms of like bringing the funds in. You bring them in via incremental deposits, right? So while the head is still open, you can add more funds. And if you want, you can remove some funds. If you want to change the group, again, while the head is already open, you can do that. There's flexibility. And then when it's time to close the head, if it's expected, i.e. everyone has had time to agree and no one unexpectedly disconnected, then we just agree to do that, and we just release all the UTXOs that were on L2, we just release them as needed, like as they're supposed to look like on L1. If something happened unexpectedly, someone disconnected, then we have a fallback plan to go through that dispute resolution procedure, right, to figure out what was the latest allocation of funds between the participants, and then we release the funds accordingly.
Okay, and on that then, do you have to have every single person that's in the head sign the final transaction, or could you have a percentage of them? I'm just thinking that if one person drops off.
Yeah, that's a good question. So in Hydra, everybody needs to sign. So on layer 2, we send each other back and forth a bunch of transactions, and there's a rotating schedule of snapshot leaders. So a snapshot leader will pick up all the transactions that they're aware of that have happened since the last snapshot, packages them up into the next snapshot, and then sends it out to everybody to collect their signatures. As soon as all the signatures are collected for the snapshot, right, then the next snapshot leader starts to build up, like he builds up his snapshot and sends it out to everybody for their signature. And so consensus-wise, everybody needs to sign off on every snapshot. If one person doesn't sign off on the snapshot, then it doesn't go through. And the reason why you need that is because if you were to require less than everybody to sign off, then we could collude to steal that one person's funds, right? Because the only thing standing, between, a new snapshot being signed or not is that person. If that new snapshot takes away all their funds, then, if we don't need their signature, then we can do something evil. That's why we need all the signatures, right? So state channels are multi-signature based. You need all the signatures. However, having said that, sometimes if you're managing information more than you're managing funds, then it might not be such a big deal if not everybody has signed off, right? So I could conceive of a Hydra head that is not really managing the funds of the participants. It's more managing some piece of information that they want to evolve very quickly, right? So for example, let's say we have an auction, and for an auction, you want to have quick responsive bidding. You want to be able to, to have people submit their bid and have that be reflected right away. You don't want to necessarily be waiting for blockchain confirmation times to, for your hot auction on this, awesome item. So for that, you can move the bidding process to L2 and have a group of independent auctioneers collectively witness the new bids coming in. And if that's what you're using the head for, then you might not, you probably don't need everybody to sign off every time. And if you don't need it, then it's good to use a threshold of, say 7 out of 10 of the auctioneers agree that they've witnessed this bid, and that's enough. And that gives you a little bit more robustness, because that means that up to 3 of them can disconnect, and we can still keep going. We don't have to wait for them to come back. Right?
Yeah, I think things like that, custom options, would be good to have as well. Obviously, it's kind of like we talked about the last day about layer 2s, and that sometimes you don't need as much decentralization, or you don't need as much throughput, or there's different reasons for using them. So having that whoever's opening it initially sets the parameters, everyone joining would have to agree that there's whatever that threshold is. But there's probably use cases there where you don't want to take the chance that your funds could be locked up for 2 days or 3 days or whatever the time period is, waiting for the last person to come back into it.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
in terms of this, then this would be on a DApp level, or it wouldn't. I know I've heard of people had the perception that Hydra was going to be for all of Cardano, but from everything I've seen and even talking here, it sounds more, at least now, that it's at a per DApp level rather than looking at overall Cardano.
No, it's not necessarily limited to a per dApp level. I think it's probably just going to be how it will start, or how people will start integrating it initially. Um, so unlike Midgard, right, and Midgard and other roll-up based L2s, they're kind of a persistent presence, and there is one of like there's one big Midgard, and you go to it if you want to interact with it. I mean, there might be different flavors of them, so there might be like 4 of them or something, right? But like with Hydra or Hydrozoa, that's like Hydrozoa is very different, and like Bitcoin Lightning. In Bitcoin Lightning, there are, I think there's like 10,000 state channels that are networked together, and new ones are opening and closing, and they're joining the network. And the name of the game there is pathing. Like, so you create, and any person who wants to interact with someone else within the network has to do it by working through this network that is kind of evolving topologically, over time and stuff, right? So it's like new ones are coming up, some of them are coming down, and there's connections being made between them and stuff, and you're kind of interacting with the system, and you kind of send your payment or your DApp interaction, and it makes its way through and finds the best route to take through this network, and it gets done, right? Whereas Midgard, if you're interacting with Midgard, you go to one place, right, and you do your thing over there. So they're very different in nature. Hydra is more transient in that it'll open and it'll close, and there's multiple of them, and they kind of do they constantly reconfigure the network. Whereas with Midgard, it's more of a persistent presence that you just interact with, right?
Yeah, I suppose that was getting towards where I was going to ask next, of why you would use one or the other. And we talked the last day about Midgard, where you could potentially move the pool from a DEX over in times of high trading volume. Would something similar be possible here, or which would be better in that kind of case where the chain load is fairly high on the layer one? Is there parts that can be offset onto the likes of Hydrozoa?
So I think I expect probably that Midgard will outcompete Hydra and Hydrozoa in terms of moving a DEX pool to layer 2 and having people interact with it there. Mainly because Midgard's consensus for smart contract execution and things like that is more secure for that use case. Because with Hydra, you're dealing with a multi-signature of a particular group of people, right? Or maybe several groups of people that are kind of working with it, interacting with each other through a network, right? And so you can have a weakest link problem where a small group of people have an outsized influence over something like a DEX pool, right? So for that, I think you'd much prefer to put your DEX pool on Midgard, where the consensus is rollup based. So as we discussed last time, transactions interacting with this DEX are posted on the data availability layer, from which then anyone can come in as a publisher, right, who's capable of posting the bond, right, packages up those transactions into the next batch of into the next into the next batch of things that are being brought back to L1, and posts a bond saying that this is guaranteed, or I guarantee that this is accurate, and if I'm wrong, if anybody comes in with a fraud proof, right, then I'm going to forfeit my bond, right? That's a stronger guarantee of correctness of what was going on the L2 than what's going on in Hydra. Because with Hydra and with state channels, the intermediate transactions are kind of lost in a sense, right? There's like when you come back, you're coming back with the final result to L1. You're not coming back with everything that's happened in between, and you're not coming back with any sort of proof that those transitions in between followed any rules. As long as the people participating in that particular state channel or in the Hydra head have signed off on it, then they're happy with it. It's all good, right? So so for those kind of applications, for big dApps that want to move their DEX pools or big dApp state that lots of people need to be able to interact with, right? And you don't want to entrust to a small group of people. It'll be better to bring those over to Midgard. However, where Hydra and state channels will excel is where you want to be able to, first of all, move stuff in and out of L1 and L2 much more quickly, right? You can achieve much better like deposit and withdrawal times with Hydra than you can with Midgard, assuming the optimistic scenario. Obviously, if things break down, then yes, there is also like that waiting period to make sure that we do get the latest snapshot. And then the other thing is it's easier to like to open and close a Hydra head than it will be to open and close, a new Midgard layer or something that, for a particular application. And so you can have specialized Hydra heads that are doing something specific for a small group of people. So let's say you have a business and they want to run their transactions, like their own private transactions for their business between each other, and they're happy having that being multi-signed by the officers of the company, or by I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about like little nodes that are being run at the company, at the enterprise, right? And then they want to be able to occasionally bring that back into Cardano L1 or send some funds or state to some other Hydra head being run by some other company or something, right? And doing that back and forth. Then Hydra might be more suitable because with Hydra, you don't actually need to show the intermediate state to anyone. With Midgard, you do. So on Midgard, every transaction goes into the data availability layer. And the whole point that it's visible to all so that anybody is able to find any sort of fraud proofs in there, right? But on the flip side, Midgard has to be completely transparent to everybody, right? Whereas with Hydra, you can keep some level of privacy about all those intermediate transactions that are not sending funds outside of the Hydra head, right?
Yeah, so two final things for me. I'm aware I was going to try and make this one shorter, but I think we're going to run on. It's a topic I'm very interested in seeing how we're going to scale in the future. But one thing that it really comes back to me on the success of it anyway is the UX. How would that be for users interacting? Because most people interacting with this, they don't really care about how things are working or if they can get faster transactions, and making that UX as simple as possible. So how would that work? Would they have to send lump funds?
I think people do care about how fast transactions are, going through, because for some applications, if the delay between you clicking to do something and it happening is too long, right? Then you tune out. You stop looking at it. You go, make yourself a coffee, or you go for a walk.
Oh
right?
yeah, well, I mean, I think they care about the space. I meant to say that they don't really care about the technology or how it
Oh, they
works
don't care
under
about,
the hood.
yeah, they care about the experience, right?
They
So let's talk
yeah,
about the
so it's all
experience.
about the experience. How will that look for Hydrozoa?
Yeah, so with Hydrozoa, one of the use cases is payments over this network, right? So, well, we have an example already of what that looks like in Bitcoin land, right? And keep in mind, Bitcoin land transaction fees on L1 are even larger, so they have an even higher incentive to kind of go to an L2 to do the payments. So in Bitcoin Lightning, I think they pay like 1 cent or something to send money and to another person, or typically, right? Obviously, it'll vary by the amount of hops, right? But on order of magnitude, it's like 1 cent or something to send a transaction. Cardano might be even lower potentially, depending on how we network these Hydra heads together, and it's much faster. So like, because you're just having this communication between the different heads, and then it goes through. So much faster payments, much cheaper, things like that. The other thing is, if applications start using Hydra heads to manage those pieces of state that need to evolve quickly. So I gave the example of the Hydra auction, right? And you can have almost like real-time bidding, like so for the Hydra auction project that the Ikigai folks are building with M Labs right now. I think they have a catalyst proposal to keep improving it. There, they actually have a demo where they're bidding in like real time, and it's happening, right? which is very different from, if you were to try to do the same thing on L1, because you submit the transaction and then you wait a minute or two for your bid to show up, right? And that makes it more of a, an offline bidding of like, there's that sort of excitement of everybody participating, and you see kind of everybody, putting up their bidding paddle, right? And the price goes up type of thing that you just aren't able to recreate with a fully L1 based protocol. So that UX needs, an L2 to be able to reproduce. And then there's synergies between the network of state channels and the roll-up based L2s, right? So as we mentioned, the optimistic roll-ups, they have a long withdrawal period that is unavoidable. They don't have, they aren't capable of doing something like, oh, if everybody agrees, then we don't need to wait for this withdrawal period, right? Because there's no such thing as everybody agrees. There is no multi-signing of these transaction packages coming into L1. Anybody's bringing it in, and then there's this chance for anybody else to detect and report any sort of fraud that has occurred in there, right? To disallow this batch from taking effect within the 7-day period or whatever. And so if you wanted to do faster withdrawals and perhaps faster deposits into Midgard, then very naturally you would use something like a network of Hydrozoa heads, right? Because then, we lock some funds into an HTLC, hash time lock contract on Hydrozoa, and then we do something similar in Midgard, and then the funds are released on Midgard by the recipient. The recipient reveals a secret, which then allows you to release the funds to any intermediaries, with the various Hydrozoa heads, and that makes the payment go through, right? And so we can probably cut down the waiting time for withdrawals from Midgard quite a bit, even better than what we talked about last time, where a third party steps in and does an L1 transaction to release funds to you on L1. With L2, you can get those funds released even faster, so within seconds as opposed to within minutes, right?
Okay. Yeah, it's good to see that there will be synergies between the two. I suppose, especially the same. You guys are looking at both proposals. There is a Catalyst proposal. I think we mentioned that earlier, and the links will be down below. But what is the status of it? You said there's examples of that. Does that mean that there's already been work done on this, or what's the
proposal? So the proposal is fully spec'd out. So I have a very in-depth specification that goes into all of the smart contracts, all of the the things that are needed to build this out. I actually wrote it last year when I previously tried to get this proposal funded. Unfortunately, it didn't get funded because, I blame the no votes in Catalyst, which, as you may be aware, kind of made a lot of people not get funded that nowadays are getting funded, because it's more sort of, we have the per person Catalyst proposal limits, and we have, and we limited the no votes. I think they really democratized the ability for people to get funded. So I'm hopeful this time around that this project will get funded and we'll get these new flexible Hydrozoa heads.
Okay, great. And as I said, I'll leave links to that down below. Any closing thoughts on it or anything? And for people who might have only watched parts of this, make sure you check out the call we done a few days ago as well, looking at layer 2, sidechains, all that type of stuff. It's a good introduction to what we've done here. And hopefully today has even given a good intro to Hydra and Hydra versus Bitcoin Lightning, and some of the similarities and some of the, I suppose, the advantages that Hydra could have. But over to you, George, for any closing thoughts.
Yeah, closing thoughts. So, unfortunately, this interview, I think I talked just generally about state channels and Hydra and stuff. I didn't quite get into beyond the flexibility of the deposits and withdrawals and of the group members, what makes Hydrozoa specifically more efficient. That's described more in the white paper and in the upcoming documentation that I'll be posting. Just very briefly, the idea there is that in that optimistic workflow, when L2 consensus is maintained, everybody is multi-signing the snapshots promptly. What we can actually do is approach an ideal where on layer one, the transactions that release the funds that are being withdrawn are as simple as possible, involve as little scripts as possible, and are as close as possible to, the cheapest transactions that you can do on Cardano is if you send someone some money, right, without any smart contracts involved, right? So we're trying to get as much of that as possible, right, to really drive down the cost and size of those transactions for withdrawals from Hydrozoa. And the benefit there is we're going to have cheaper transactions, and also they'll have an easier time making it into Cardano blocks because they're smaller, right? Smaller transactions can make it into a block easier than larger transactions. So.
Okay, great. Look, anyone more questions or anything like that, leave them down below, and we might do a follow up. We talked about maybe doing a live stream talking about all this type of stuff, maybe bringing a few other people at some point in the next few weeks as well. Subscribe if you're new, if you're interested in that type of stuff. I cover not just the technical stuff, general updates on Cardano, but I do like to get into these types of calls every so often as well to find out what's coming or how we can scale in the future. George, thanks very much for your time. Unfortunately, Phil dropped out maybe halfway through, but we got him for the start and he was here for the last call too. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll talk to you soon. Cheers, George.
Thank you very much, Paul. Cheers.